In 1987, Street Fighter, or as I like to call it, Fighting Street, would hit the arcades. It would be the start of one of the most influential series in gaming history. Street Fighter led to the creation of another fighter, and that is Fatal Fury. Released on November 25, 1991, Fatal Fury was the first fighting game for the Neo Geo. The connection between these two games is that they were directed by Takashi Nishiyama. In a 2012 interview with 1UP, Nishiyama envisioned Fatal Fury as a spiritual successor to Street Fighter. Two things he emphasized in Fatal Fury are the characters and storyline. Fatal Fury is about the King of Fighters tournament, which is held in Southtown and sponsored by crime lord Geese Howard. Brothers Terry and Andy Bogard, along with their friend Joe Higashi, entered the tournament to avenge the death of Terry and Andy's father Jeff, who was murdered by Geese 10 years earlier. The story is told through dialogue and cutscenes in the intro and in between matches. Before the tournament, the fighters overlook Southtown, and Terry is seen getting out of his cab to view the King of Fighters poster. Throughout the tournament, Geese Howard monitors their progress, and his frustration begins to show as the victories pile up, leading to a confrontation with him once the tournament has concluded. Fatal Fury is best known for the two-plane system, which allows the fighters to attack and maneuver between the foreground and background. This adds an extra dimension to the battles. Some stages are restricted to a single plane, where if a fighter is knocked into the background, he is bounced back onto the foreground. Another notable feature, which was not used in any of its sequels, are the 2-on-1 battles. A second player can join in while a match is in progress and make it a 2-on-1 fight. If both players are victorious, a 1-on-1 battle between each player will follow to determine who advances in the tournament. The roster features characters with a wide array of fighting styles. Only Terry, Andy, and Joe are selectable for this tournament. The Bogarts combine a variety of martial arts and have the power to gather chi energy to unleash projectiles and other charge attacks like the Burnt Knuckle and a Zenikin. Joe is a Muay Thai fighter who unleashes devastating kick and knee strikes with the power to control wind by unleashing the Hurricane Upper, giving him the nickname Hurricane Joe. Amongst the non-playable fighters, there's Richard Meyer, owner of the Pow Pow Cafe and Capoeira master who performs handstand and cartwheel kicks. Professional wrestler Raiden, who is based on New Japan and WCW legend Big Van Vader, is a rule breaker that uses poison mist and a devastating power bomb. Elderly fighter Tung Fu Ru turns into a raging Hulk when he takes enough damage and uses a spinning lariat which moves across the screen. There's a current King of Fighters champion Billy Khan who wields a staff which gives him great attack range. Watch out when he throws a staff at you. Of course, there's a sponsor Geese Howard who is a master of Aiki Jujutsu. His trademark is the ability to counter nearly any attack with a throw. The Southtown locations are detailed, colorful, and lively, with the spectators cheering for the winner. Some of these venues would become recurring locations in both the Fatal Fury and King of Fighters series, such as the Pow Pow Cafe, a Brazilian Asian-themed nightclub which features live music, and it's the main hangout spot for many of the fighters, and the top of Geese Tower, which overlooks Southtown and is adorned with many statues where several dramatic battles would occur. Each round of a match, with few exceptions, takes place at different times of the day, starting when it's daylight and commencing at night. This day-evening-night cycle will become a staple of the Fatal Fury series and was used in non-SNK fighters such as Karnof's Revenge and Waku Waku 7. Home ports of Fatal Fury were released for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. As usual, I use original hardware and cartridges to record the footage, and gameplay is set to the standard arcade difficulty. We will begin with the Super Nintendo port, which was ported by Takara and released in 1993. The intro differs from the arcade by showing a text scroll about the King of Fighters tournament and Geese Howard's stronghold on Southtown, which leads to the title screen. Two key characteristics of Fatal Fury are absent in this port: the two-plane system and the 2-on-1 battles. These omissions makes this version a fighter without an identity. I can understand why the 2-on-1 fights were left out, as the Super Nintendo did not have the horsepower to handle this, but there's no excuse for not having the plane switching. As a consolation for the two-player game, you can play as the non-selectable fighters including Geese Howard, though they're only playable on the player 2 side. Players can use the same character in Versus mode. Also in Versus mode, you can select the venue where the match takes place. The normally non-playable fighters in Versus mode have techniques not found in the Neo Geo version. For example, Michael Max can do a rapid combo punch, and Duck King uses a backdrop. There is loading before the start of each match, which is unusual for a cartridge game. I find the controls to be stiff. It feels like there's a delayed reaction when I'm attacking, which slows my attack speed, putting me at a disadvantage, especially against a fighter like Duck King, who can quickly spam his sliding kick. Some special moves can be difficult to execute, but then the arcade version had this problem as well. I struggled the most with charge specials. The input commands for the specials are based on the Japanese Neo Geo version. There are hit detection issues. It seems like my opponents have priority on their attacks over mine. I will land an unblocked attack without any damage inflicted. All these issues make the Super Nintendo port more difficult than the arcade. When you fight Billy Khan in the Neo Geo version, his staff breaks if you throw him, but that doesn't happen in this port. Some special attacks have shorter range compared to the Neo Geo version, and they don't inflict as much damage. Here's a quick comparison. The graphics in this version are colorful and retain most of the details from the arcade, even with the lower resolution. There are background omissions, most notably that there are fewer spectators. There are missing objects such as the passing subway trains in the West Subway and the Green Dragon statues in the Pow Pow Cafe. Plus, some background items are not animated, like the palm trees in Sound Beach, the tree in the Howard Arena, and the Ferris wheel in the Dream Amusement Park. The third round matches against Duck King and Raiden do not take place at night like they're supposed to in the arcade. Michael Max's win pose was censored. He doesn't do the sign of the cross. The arcade version used sprite scaling when a defeated fighter fell down Geese Tower. Unfortunately, this was omitted from this port. In addition to this, most of the other cutscenes were left out with just the same crop image of Geese Howard used throughout the game, so you don't get a good feel for the game's plot in this version. The soundtrack is solid, even though you don't have the variety of instruments such as the gong, except for the title screen, the flute, and the electric guitar found in the arcade's themes. My favorite theme in this version is Hua Jai's. The tracks restart at the beginning of each round as opposed to them continuing to play like in the arcade. The rest of the audio is severely lacking in certain areas. Not all the names of the specials are called out. These are replaced with generic grunts and groans, and the same ones are used for different specials. The specials that are called out sound faded. Sounds like the thunder and rainfall are missing in the Howard Arena. Most of the announcer voices are absent. Terry, Andy, and Joe's victory chants are not heard, the crowd doesn't cheer and whistle when you win a round, and your opponents don't laugh when you lose a round. For miscellaneous info, the arm wrestling bonus game was replaced with a generic tire smashing game. The original bonus game should have been left in to show off the color capabilities. The special move demo after each bonus game was left out. We're now going to take a side-by-side look between the Neo Geo and Super Nintendo versions of Fatal Fury. Next, we will look at the Sega Genesis port, which was developed by Guide Brain with Aspect handling the audio with Takashi as the publisher. This version also uses an intro that differs from the arcade. It features artwork that was found in the arcade advertisements and the Japanese AES cover art. There were major omissions in the Genesis port, but there were some additions made. Hua Jai and Billy Khan are not present to include their stages, though they make cameo appearances in some of the other backgrounds. To make up for their absence, the start of some matches are interrupted by one of the other two playable characters, which leads to a match that you must win to move on to your originally scheduled opponent. This results in you still having to win 8 matches to complete the game. The 2-on-1 battles are not present in this port. In Versus mode, the non-playable fighters are selectable for both players, including Geese Howard via a code. You can also play a Versus matchup against the CPU. In addition, you can select which stage to fight in. Like in the Super Nintendo version, the non-playable characters have moves and abilities not found in the Neo Geo version. Some of these abilities differ from the Super Nintendo port. For example, Michael Max can jump, throw, and do a dash punch, and Tung Fu Ru can do a flip kick. Gameplay-wise, the 2-plane system has been retained. The Sound Beach stage has 2 planes, whereas the arcade version had just 1. You can't roll when switching planes. The plane switching happens frequently in this version, which becomes annoying. Far too often when you make mid-air contact with your opponent when plane switching, you both end up back on opposite planes. If you and your opponent are on opposite planes at either end of the stage, your opponent may not switch planes. You can use this to your advantage if you have more health than them. For the most part, the Genesis port controls well. It's more responsive compared to the Super Nintendo version. The special moves are not difficult to perform, especially if you use a 6-button controller because of the smaller directional pad. Just like in the Super Nintendo port, the range of some special attacks differ from the arcade. Projectiles travel farther, but other special moves either travel the same distance as the arcade or less. See for yourself. One issue I noticed was that the jump mechanics feel floaty, as the jump speed is slower and the jump height is higher than the arcade version. There are attack frames missing from the arcade, which impacts some of these moves. For example, the frame for Andy's stationary jump kick is used for his forward jump kick, which has a different attack angle than his actual forward jump kick from the arcade. The attack speed is faster in this port compared to the Neo Geo version. Because of this, along with the added abilities of the CPU-controlled opponents, this port at times can be more difficult than the Neo Geo version. The backgrounds are not as colorful as the Neo Geo or Super Nintendo versions, though they do cycle between day, evening, and night for each round. The Genesis version has its share of missing background items. In the West Subway, you don't see passing trains, and the Real Bout billboard is missing. In the Howard Arena, the Southtown skyline is not visible at night, and the rain only occurs during that time. The Dream Amusement Park suffers from the most omissions. There are very few spectators, no vehicles, and the buildings on the right end of the stage are not seen. On the other hand, the Genesis port has more background animations than the Super Nintendo version, such as the examples I used earlier. The cutscenes during the tournament are present in this port, but the Fall Down Geese Tower and the player overlooking Southtown during the ending are not. The beats of the music are there, and while you don't have the instrumentals found in the Neo Geo's tracks, it gets the job done. Like in the Super Nintendo port, the tracks restart at the beginning of each round. The names of the specials are called out in this version, though the audio is nowhere clear as the arcade. Most of the announcers' voices are missing. On the positive side, the victory chants are heard, and the spectators cheer and whistle when you win a round. For miscellaneous info, this version does not keep score and there are no bonus games. You're not shown a demonstration of how to perform special moves after every 2 wins. The CPU fighters have different win poses. We're now going to take a side-by-side look between the Neo Geo and Genesis ports of Fatal Fury. Fatal Fury is what made me a Neo Geo fan. I know that compared to its contemporary Street Fighter II, it doesn't have the multitude of playable characters or combos, but the vibe of Fatal Fury appealed to me. I enjoyed playing this in the arcades as much as Street Fighter II. I'm a die-hard fan of the soundtrack. The wide array of instruments brought out rocking themes which caters to the characters. Some themes that really stand out are Richard Meyer, Hua Jai, Raiden, and of course Geese Howard. The day-evening-night cycle was a great concept which diversifies the backgrounds, especially when details change, like the rainstorm when you fight Tung Fu Roo. The colorful and lively background set the tone of what you would expect from Neo Geo fighters. Over time, the characters would develop colorful and sometimes wacky personalities, and their lives would intertwine with one another. It made it easy for me to relate to them. Thanks to Fatal Fury and its sequels, I've grown to dislike Billy Khan as an opponent, though he is a cool character. The tournament name would eventually become its own series, with the 15th installment in the main King of Fighters series in development as of the time this video was posted. Each of the two home ports had their fair share of issues which prevented them from capturing the look and feel of the arcade. Despite two missing fighters, I will have to say that the Genesis version is superior to the Super Nintendo port due to better controls, retaining the two-plane system, added moves for the CPU fighters, and more options in Versus mode. We will close out this video by showing all three versions of Fatal Fury together. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.